Audio check one, two.
I have a I just want you to throw them in the chokey if they get 3 minutes.
You want him to run a 3-minute timer?
Yeah. It turns red when it's on.
What's that?
Turns red when it's on.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Higher Education and Employment Advancement public hearing. It's our first one of this session. Before we kick it off, and we have 8 people who are signed up to testify. I'll introduce myself. My name is Derek Slapp, State Senator, 5th State Senate District. I'll see if my co-chair or ranking members have any comments before we get going.
No.
Okay. Great. So our first speaker is David Benedict, the athletic director for the University of Connecticut. David, good morning. How are you? Congratulations on last night's win. You're nervous after that first half, huh?
I don't get nervous. I worry about the stuff I can control, which last night, the shots going in and out in the first half is nothing I could control.
Fair enough. Well, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, honorable co-chairs, ranking members, and members of Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. My name is David Benedict, and I am the Director of Athletics at the University of Connecticut. With me today, to my right here, is Nate LaValle, our Deputy Legal Counsel. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the university and support of HB 6446, an act concerning student-athlete compensation through endorsement contracts and revenue sharing agreements. Many of you are aware that the collegiate athletics landscape has experienced a seismic shift in recent years, especially since the National Collegiate Athletics Association, better known as the NCAA, altered its longstanding policy and allowed student athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness in July of 2021. I want to thank this committee and everyone in the Connecticut General Assembly at the time for your vision and leadership on this matter, as Connecticut was among the first states to pass a bill on this topic, allowing our student athletes to be among the first to take advantage of NIL opportunities. Since the bill's passage, the NCAA's NIL regulations have continued to evolve and change. The most recent change is the NCAA's plan to begin allowing schools to directly compensate student athletes. This change is being made as a result of the highly anticipated multi-billion-dollar lawsuit settlement that is commonly referred to as the House settlement. House versus NCAA was brought forward by several former NCAA student athletes in 2020 and claimed that the NCAA rules prohibiting student athletes from profiting off their NIL prior to 2021 violated antitrust laws, essentially arguing that student athletes should have the ability to earn compensation for their commercial value while participating in intercollegiate athletics. House sought damages for the lost NIL opportunities athletes experienced before the NCAA changed its rules to allow student athletes to monetize their NIL. The case recently reached a proposed settlement and is scheduled to receive a court approval on April 7th of 2025. Division I schools across the country expect the settlement to include language describing how the NCAA will agree to pay former student athletes back pay for their lost NIL opportunities and implement a revenue sharing model that allows student athletes to receive direct payments from their universities beginning in the academic year of 2025-26. The NCAA has been preparing its member schools for this outcome over the last several months, and I believe it is inevitable. To that end, several states, including Louisiana, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Utah, Virginia, and Mississippi, have either adopted or proposed legislation allowing schools in those states to offer revenue sharing opportunities to current student athletes. Additionally, I have had conversation with many of my counterparts across the country, and most states are actively pursuing legislation or executive actions similar to what the committee has introduced. Given the inevitability of the House settlement outcomes, it is imperative that Connecticut once again be among the first states to act so we do not find ourselves in a detrimental situation in terms of student athlete recruitment and retention. Understanding the need for transparency, we are happy to report the total amount of revenue shared with student athletes and the number of student athletes receiving revenue sharing each year. However, we do ask that individual contracts are protected to ensure student privacy. Included in our proposal is language that will extend the current Freedom of Information Act exemption that protects student athlete contracts from disclosure to also cover revenue sharing agreements. This exemption will allow student athletes to maintain their privacy, increase compensation opportunities, and avoid the competitive disadvantages that would occur if Connecticut universities were required to share contract details. We have proposed additional language that will ensure institutions of higher education and student athletes with protection from the NCAA or other athletics associations with respect to future revenue sharing agreements. This language will make certain that UConn and other institutions of higher education in our state are playing by the same rules as our peers across the country. I would like to request one change to the bill. Specifically, I ask you to consider expanding the definition of a student athlete to include students who have accepted an offer to attend a Connecticut university but may not yet be enrolled. This will enable our coaches to operate in the same manner as their peers who are actively executing contracts with recruits who have committed. Attached to my testimony is a proposed amendment to the bill for your consideration that makes this change. The adoption of these measures will put our coaches in the best possible position to recruit and retain outstanding student athletes and will ensure our student athletes enjoy the same advantages with respect to monetizing their talents as their peers across the country. UConn Athletics will thereby be best positioned to continue upon its mission to provide a world-class experience to our student athletes and deliver championship-level performance to its supporters in our state and across the country. Finally, since the inception of Title IX over 50 years ago, UConn has demonstrated a commitment to the success of our female student athletes, beginning with our field hockey team capturing the first NCAA Women's National Championship in 1981. Our field hockey team has won 4 additional NCAA championships since then, and our women's basketball team has set the standard of excellence for the entire country, winning 11 national championships since 1995. We continue to invest in women's athletics to great response, evidenced by our women's basketball team setting new standards in ticket revenue year after year. Given this history, we look forward to continuing to prioritizing equity among our men's and women's programs. We are in a strong position to do so, thanks to the success of our women's athletic programs and the support of UConn Nation. Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee in support of HB 6446. As always, we greatly appreciate your continued support of the University of Connecticut. Nate and I are happy to answer any questions.
David, thank you very much. I'm sure my colleagues have some questions. I have just a couple, and then we'll open it up. If this bill was to become law, so the University of Connecticut would be allowed to share revenues up to $20.5 million, right, with its student athletes?
That is correct in the first year.
Right. So what would UConn's approach be in terms of dividing that money up? And I know that's kind of a tough question to answer, but, you know, it's something that I think there's this balance that we're trying to find, or I can speak for myself, in terms of we don't want to do anything to diminish the University of Connecticut's ability to compete, right, with other schools. At the same time, it's a public institution. It's not a private school, or it's not a professional sports team. So we're trying to find that balance in terms of understanding with revenue sharing, specifically how much revenue might be shared, how is it going to be shared, because obviously it impacts, right, the bottom line of the athletic department, which is already, you know, running a deficit. So can you kind of speak to your overall approach to revenue sharing and how you see that playing out over the next year or so?
Yes, well, I appreciate the question. And as you can imagine, the head coaches on our campus have similar questions. And what I would tell you is that while we are formulating different types of scenarios as it relates to how we will share revenue, we have yet to introduce this to our board for their approval, because the landscape is fluid. Much of this could be determined by the outcome of the House settlement. And so we are anxiously awaiting the House settlement. If you follow the House settlement, Judge Wilkin, who's presiding over House, she is indicating a certain distribution based on percentages of the settlement to different types of student athletes participating in different sports. And so we are anxiously awaiting more information before we make a final decision on how we distribute money. I would point out that up until this time, those of you that are familiar with name, image, and likeness and how that works, the majority, all of that money that is being provided to student athletes through opportunities is outside dollars. And many of you may be familiar with Bleeding Blue for Good. Bleeding Blue for Good is a collective that is specifically been created to support student athletes at the University of Connecticut and create opportunities for them in the space of NIL. And all of that money is new money and is coming directly from supporters outside of the university. And so I am sorry that I can't give you a specific answer to that right now. I think it will be challenging for the University of Connecticut to be anywhere close to the cap of the 20.5 million because we are not in a conference that distributes the type of revenues that the Power Four does. But we will be using revenues that are associated with outside support, ticket dollars, sponsorship dollars, media dollars. So none of this revenue will be associated with any state support or university support.
Great. Thank you for that. I do appreciate that we've had conversations prior to this public hearing about what information would be included. And I appreciate the universities and your openness to including, listing or reporting back to this committee how much revenue has been shared with student athletes and how many athletes received that revenue. There is a request from the Freedom of Information Commission, as I'm sure you know, to have more information reported in terms of disaggregating that by team and by gender as well. What's your take on that position?
I'll allow my legal counsel to first take a stab at that, and I'm happy to follow up.
Sure. As we're talking about the reporting requirement, I think it's important just to remind the committee that of all the states, I mean, we're talking about dozens and dozens of states who have passed the laws for NIL revenue sharing in general. None have a reporting requirement. Connecticut would be the first. And the reason why we're seeing that there's not a reporting requirement is because of the protection and confidentiality and privacy for students. The more information that you provide through different types of reporting allows you to connect students to their contracts. And I think just a few weeks ago, the FBI came out with a warning on December 30th that highlights the growing trends right now of organized theft groups who are targeting professional athletes. They're looking for high-profile, wealthy individuals who are traveling to games. Unlike professional athletes like Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, who can afford extensive security and live in gated residences, student athletes typically live on campus. Their schedules are well known. They know that they have a class schedule, a practice schedule. They know when they're traveling. And so it's important that we keep that privacy and protection of our safety of our students. And that's what we're seeing across all the other states' legislation and what we're trying to do here, while also providing some transparency through that reporting act.
So just to be clear, you do support the language in terms of reporting on overall how much revenue is being shared and by how many athletes, but leaving it at that spot.
I think that there's a competitiveness piece. And again, this is getting into the weeds, and I'm not sure how closely all of you follow college athletics these days, but there's this thing called the transfer portal. And the transfer portal creates, unfortunately, at this time, based on the rules, basically a constant free agency model. And so in the event that we are required to get more specific than is currently being requested in the bill, it would provide us a significant disadvantage because every institution across the country would know exactly how our student athletes are being compensated. Therefore, they could make offers or insinuate offers and opportunities that would be greater than what we provide. And so that would put us at a significant disadvantage. And while I'm not in disagreement with what is currently in the bill, I would just say that to Nate's point, we would be doing something that currently nobody else is being asked to do.
Gotcha. Thank you. Representative Haddad?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you both for making yourselves available to the committee so we can ask questions about this initiative. I take it from your last answer that you accept the language, but you're probably not giving it a full-throated endorsement. But I did just want to ask another question about FOI as it relates to student privacy. I imagine the university is probably directed more appropriately to Nate. The university currently has a number of students on its payroll for a number of reasons, right? And additionally, you provide scholarships to both student athletes and regular athletes. Is any of that information, to what extent is that information currently FOIable?
So I believe the majority, any student who receives a stipend income that's directly related to being a student at the university would be protected under FERPA. And FERPA would relate to the revenue sharing contracts as well. The difference being that in addition to just redaction of personally identified information, we're dealing with very small groups of athletes, and that exposure would be, you could ask for little bits at a time and be able to put all those pieces back together to figure out who each athlete was, what they were earning. You could also find out, like I said, more of their privacy issues and personal information, and then tie it to their social media account. So we're protecting the privacy, but this exemption also helps us make sure that in addition to FERPA, the gaps that we've seen prior in between that is going to be covered as well to protect those students.
Yeah, understood. I mean, the women's basketball team has a roster of 10 or something like that. Is that what?
15.
15. Okay. And so if you're reporting by team, you're narrowing the group pretty significantly. I would guess, well, I won't guess, I'll put this to form a question. About how many student athletes are there at the university, and how many do you think would have the potential to share in the revenue streams moving forward? Or what percentage of a student athlete would you anticipate being able to share in revenue streams in the future environment?
Well, philosophically, my position would be that the idea around revenue sharing and NIL is conceptually the idea that our student athletes are indirectly involved in us generating money. And therefore, yes, if you think about things in a market, there will be student athletes that have more value than others based on their participation and their impact on the court, on the field. However, with respect to our ability to use the name, image, and likeness of all of our student athletes, one would think that you would have to have some type of deal with everybody. And so therefore, in the way I'm thinking about it, we'd like to have a deal with every student athlete on our campus. Therefore, we make a contract with them that for that deal, whatever the amount is, that we have the right then to use their NIL in any type of promotional material that we like to put out, whether it be for the sale of season tickets, for sponsorship, or just to promote our brand. And so therefore, at some level, I would like to have every student athlete have a deal on our campus. The difference will be at what level.
Thank you. Regarding the timeline that we're talking about, the House settlement was agreed to last spring sometime, I think, so when it first surfaced.
Preliminary.
It's currently, I mean, I don't know what the correct legal terms are, and still being vetted. In different parties are accepting to participate in that settlement or not. When do you anticipate that the settlement may be finalized and effective?
So the goal and what they've been reporting is April 7th. However, today is the last day for objections to be in, right? So at this point, all the objections that anyone might have to the settlement are going to be put into the record. The judge will review that, determine whether or not they need to have hearings on those. And so while we're hopeful we will see a final settlement on April 7th, it may be delayed. And that's important to us too, because other states are already passing these types of laws to show that the student athletes, regardless of whether or not House is delayed, postponed, or even if it blows up somehow, the ability to have the revenue sharing contracts and follow what the NCAA is already telling us is the next progression in student athlete, college sports will begin. And that's what we're trying to do.
Right. And so our current law it contains, and this is what we're trying to fix in this bill, would prohibit you, currently prohibits you from entering into into these contracts.
If we did not have this law passed before April 7th and House was approved, we could not do what all the other schools could.
And so beginning potentially as early as mid-April, South Carolina or Notre Dame could make an offer to Sarah Strong. Right?
Well, I don't want to call anyone out specifically, but yes, the idea and for good reason, our current statute contains that language because right now universities are not allowed to directly share with or contract with student athletes. But yes, we are assuming that the inevitability that this is going to happen. But you're correct. We would not be able to do that, and it would put us at a significant disadvantage with respect to Sarah Strong or any other student athlete on our campus.
Yeah, I didn't mean to pick on Sarah Strong in particular, but I just think that she's, potentially a big part of the success of the women's basketball team in years to come. I'd like to see her stay, along with many other of our recruits.
Well, to your point, and this goes back to the earlier question about communication of details. Coach Oriema made comments after one of his most recent games that, NIL and revenue sharing is going to be much more about retention, to your point, than it is necessarily recruitment.
I appreciate all your responses. I'll see if many of our other colleagues, I'm sure, have questions, and I might circle back for a couple more at the end. Thank you.
Senator Martin, do you have?
Thank you. Dave, I just want some clarity regarding the what's going to be FOIable to the public regarding to the public. Are we talking about a lump sum amount? Or are we talking about per team? What will we be able to see if this legislation goes through the way it is?
As proposed, it would be the aggregate number of student athletes participating in some form of revenue sharing. And so that the total aggregate number of student athletes and the total aggregate amount of money that's shared.
And the maximum amount is 20 million?
20.5 million is
20.5.
what
But
they're
the-
referring to as the cap.
So here's the cap, and here's the total number of athletes receiving.
W-
Not
It-
not a breakdown, but the total number of athletes,
would-
100 athletes, 20 athletes, et cetera.
It would be the total number of athletes. So hypothetically, if we have 600 student athletes and every one of them has a deal, we would report that 600 student athletes received some form of revenue sharing, and then what the total aggregate amount of those dollars were that were spread out amongst those 600 student athletes.
Will there be a team amount? An aggregate
That
per
is
team?
that
per
is
team?
currently not in this bill.
Would you oppose that?
Yes,
For what reason?
for the competitive disadvantages that it would create.
With the other institutions in the country?
Yes, as well as what Nate shared, you're now communicating much more specific information about what individuals, even though you're
They
going to
could
report it
figure
as
it
a
out.
team.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
some
could
of our
figure it out.
teams are very small.
Okay. So I'm a star athlete, high school. You're trying to solicit me. What's that going to look like for the coach when we're at my house and you're trying to entice me? How does that conversation take place? And how do you present their percentage of the revenue share?
Well, within the context, assuming that all of these rules are approved, we have a state law, the NCAA moves forward, House gets settled. We currently offer financial aid to all of our student athletes. Financial aid includes, in some cases, because not all of our student athletes get full scholarships. Some of them get what we refer to as equivalencies. So they get a portion of a scholarship. In addition to that, they get room and board. There's something called cost of attendance that is over and above the scholarship. And then there's also what they refer to as Alston, which is another legal case that was settled that allows you to share more money. And so the way it would look is similar to what we do now is we make an offer to a student athlete that provides various levels of support. And this would just be added to all of the things that we currently can offer a student athlete.
So that 20.5, that's going to the athletes, correct?
Well, 20.5 is an established number that was agreed upon by the NCAA and the commissioners of the 4 power conferences. So that is the cap. I don't believe that we are going to be able to be in a
No.
position financially to get to the cap and offer all $20.5 million to our student
But
athletes.
that is the cap.
That is
So,
correct.
So I guess I'm the star athlete and I'm going to bring in a lot of revenue to the school. How's that negotiations take place with me? Are you giving a certain percentage of that 20.5 to that star athlete?
So Senator Martin, if I could jump in for a minute, I've been talking to a lot of other general counsels and contracting, what they're looking at. And none of the models that I've talked to any other school has talked about giving a student an exact percentage. Right now, what you're seeing is generally it's a fee for their NIL to use and
A
some
fee.
services that they'll provide. But it's not saying if you come here, you will get 3% of all revenue too. That's not the model that I've seen out there.
No, and I would go a step further. In most of these conversations, when you get into, if you're referring to the star athlete, athletes that have and can command more than the average, they all have representation in the form of agents. And so the coach is not necessarily going to be speaking with the student athlete directly about what their potential rev share will be. It will be an agent most likely.
But it's based on a fee rather than a percentage.
That's correct. That's what we're seeing. That's what I'm seeing so far.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David, thank you for being here today. And first, I'd like to commend you for navigating us through this wholly uncharted territory as of now. Personally, I can't say I love all this money in college sports, but that ship has sailed. So in my opinion, we better got on board. So, you know, we're taking these steps now. And a couple things I just want to clarify, maybe a couple questions, but we're talking a lot about this FOIA piece and what is and what's not. And just to be abundantly clear, any of this revenue share money was not tied to any state appropriated funds, right? It is all in wholly private funds.
That's correct.
And then you talked a little bit about hoping we expand the definition for accepted student. Can you just explain why and how that might look in the process?
Yes, Nate can speak more to the technicality and the legal aspect of the language, but the situation that we're trying to create for our coaches in the recruitment process is that prior to enrollment, just like we do now, student athletes are not enrolled at the University of Connecticut while we're going through the recruiting process. And so it would just be an extension of the current behavior, which is we go out and recruit and sell why we think people should come to the University of Connecticut. And during that process of recruitment, you talk about the financial aid offer that you're going to provide a student athlete should they come to the University of Connecticut. And that is how recruiting is handled across the country. And so to be in a potential position where we would not be able to talk about the overall financial aid compensation that a student athlete would get until they were enrolled would put us at a significant disadvantage.
Right. So if we don't make this change, we're essentially removing this as a recruiting tool, because otherwise you can't enter this
Absolutely.
contract until they are a student.
So you would tell a student, we want you to come to UConn. Here's a financial aid package. We understand that you would want an NIL deal and we want to give it to you, but just trust us. You'll get one once you come to UConn and enroll in classes. And no other school is doing that.
Yeah, so those making the change will be necessary to say and talk to these potential student athletes to say, hey, this is what our offer will be. And if not, then there's really no competitive advantage to offering the revenue share for recruitment.
That's absolutely correct. And it should be noted that, and not confused, that this is an offer to someone should they come and enroll. We would not be distributing any form of compensation prior to enrollment. So this is setting up the stage for if you come to UConn, if you enroll, once you're enrolled and on our campus, then the financial aid agreement would go into effect.
Thank you for making that point too. Also, we say we pass this prior to April 7th. The lawsuit doesn't get settled April 7th and it gets pushed out to, it doesn't matter, June, July, whenever. Even though we have this in place, the revenue share agreements cannot begin until that lawsuit is settled.
So under the way this bill is written, it's much like if we went back to 2021 with the NIL, it wasn't legal yet from the NCAA. All the states were beginning to pass it. Connecticut was at the forefront of that. We passed our bill. In the bill is language that says basically, if UConn goes forward to do this without NCAA permission, the NCAA cannot punish UConn or its students for it. We don't plan to use that, just like we didn't plan to use it in the NIL, because honestly, right after that, 3 weeks later, the NCAA rolled over. So it's there to protect us, and we could move forward with those contracts with the students under the Connecticut law, but we anticipate that House will be done before that's necessary. And more importantly, that if it's not, the NCAA will come out with initial guidance like it did in 2021.
And so time is of the essence to pass this to make sure we could be at the forefront of using this as a recruitment tool. Otherwise, we're behind the 8 ball of other schools approaching potential student athletes.
That's absolutely correct. And that's why I noted in my comments how important it was that we acted on NIL. And so we're trying to put ourselves in the same position that we were when we came to you about NIL. And now we're here about revenue sharing.
Thank you. And last one real quick. I mean, you're here on behalf of UConn, but passing this will allow all public institutions in Connecticut to enter revenue share agreements with student athletes?
Not only will allow them to, without it, none of the other schools in Connecticut can do this either.
Thanks for that clarification. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Gadkar Wilcox, followed by Representative Ackert.
Thank you. Did you have something else you're about to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to make the statement that as a part of revenue sharing, the current set of guidelines from the NCAA is that institutions will have to opt in. And so it should be understood that while this bill would allow all of institutions in the state of Connecticut to participate in revenue sharing, it does not require them to.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add or ask, so without more transparent disclosure requirements, are there other mechanisms in place now to guarantee equity in distribution? What can guarantee that, or to even incentivize? Because once you start following the money, there will be likely a disincentive to support often female athletics and then also other sports that are not generating revenue. So are there other mechanisms in place that ensure the equity? I understand you just mentioned that some of this may come out in the lawsuit, but are there sort of other
Sure.
things
I
you
can
kind of
comment on that. So, I mean, right now with NIL and revenue sharing, we are still in the wild, wild west, right? But we're navigating a very dynamic environment here regarding application of Title IX and and how it's going to affect with revenue sharing. So we understand, I mean, so I guess the backstop is we have state laws and federal laws. And most importantly, we have Title IX, which has been, part of UConn for 50 years. And we not only understand the requirements of Title IX, but we recognize the importance. And UConn has a strong track record and a long-standing commitment to prioritizing women athletics. We understand the requirements and the need for equitable operations. We believe UConn is well positioned, more than probably most other schools, to continue promoting and ensuring equity in our athletic programs. It's on our radar. It's on all the schools' radars, and we're monitoring it as it's, like I said, it's changing every day.
Thank you. Representative Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, gentlemen, thank you for both coming again. And thank you for the time the other day and explaining this, as I had, a number of questions, but I struggle with this. I was an enormous supporter, ask your government relations folks on the NIL, and a strong supporter of UConn. My district is right next to the great district that Representative Haddad represents, where UConn is positioned in one of the areas. But, when you thought about paying athletes, I thought about them offsetting working at Subway or someplace, because they couldn't do that after school or on a weekend because their time was committed to you. When I supported NIL, I thought that's what I was kind of saying. Okay, they're going to have some revenue that they could use. But as we know, it blew up. It astronomically blew up for some athletes. Do you feel that there is more animosity now amongst players because of what we did in 2021 and what this may do? Do you think that is something that we've created? You didn't do it. You're dealt with what has happened. I get that. But I look at, a player handing out sneakers to all of her teammates and the money that she's making, and good for her, right? Well, what is the dynamic that you're now facing in college sports that was never there when you started out in sports and others, right? You gave them a great opportunity to get tuition-free college, a place to live while they're there, maybe some other items. And now they're millionaires and they can jump ship, right? And jump in the portal to go to another place that may offer them more. What have we done to college sports? So I don't know if that's a question or comment, but it goes back to the animosity. What has happened on the courts and our playing fields that we've created that you now have to deal with?
Representative Acker, it's a fair and reasonable question, and it's something that I think our coaches, had a very heightened awareness about going into NIL and how is this going to impact, the culture of a team, which I think if you listen to our coaches and what they talk about, the culture within a team is very critical. And so when you add in NIL and potentially revenue sharing and transfer portal, there's lots of different things that are impacting the ability of a coach to manage a culture. And so the best that I can do is use my own experience with it since NIL went into effect. And what I would tell you, and in some ways surprisingly so, is I have yet to have a student athlete walk into my office and complain that somebody else has these NIL opportunities and I don't. And in fact, there's a lot of our student athletes that really don't care about NIL. They're there to compete. They're there to get an education and to pursue whatever their goals and dreams are after leaving. And so I wouldn't say that we have a lot of millionaires walking around our campus, but certainly there's a lot of money that has been created because of the opportunity that now exists with NIL. I think it's in the billions of dollars if you look at all college student athletes. And what I would tell you is I think it's fantastic that student athletes have been given the right that they should have had a long time ago, which is why House is going on, to monetize what is theirs. It's their name, image, and likeness. And if someone wants to, outside the university, compensate them for the use of that, I don't see a problem with that. And, no different than the rest of society, there are companies that choose to engage with individuals in different ways to represent their companies. And that's what's happening, not just at the University of Connecticut, but throughout the country. But I'm not suggesting that there's no animosity at all, but it's not widespread on our campus.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I know there's a struggle with that possibly with players, but it was all private money before. And I know what you're saying, that this is private money, and the good ranking member asked the question about that this is private investment money that individuals are giving to UConn now to distribute. NIL was directly to the students, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that it's outside of the university. And so if a company or an individual chose to contribute to Bleeding Blue for Good in support of creating opportunities for our student athletes, that happened all outside of the university. The opportunity exists, not that we have to do it this way, but the opportunity exists to now have that donor that wants to participate in that way, do it directly through the university versus do it outside. And so the dollars potentially would be the same dollars. They would just be coming through the university. And I think that there's a value in that right now, there are portions of this that you get concerned about. And if you read some of the things that are going on around the country, there's lawsuits now because student athletes were engaged by collectives outside of universities, but supposedly on behalf of a university that have made offers that didn't follow through. And so this puts you in a position to have much more control, which I think there is value in.
I would just add on that. I understand there's a frustration out there, but I think a lot of people would also argue that frustration should be pointed at some of the schools. When you go back to the Supreme Court case with NCAA versus Oklahoma trustees, when NCAA lost and schools were now all of a sudden allowed to secure broadcasting rights and sell it. And so the revenue that was a small and hundreds of millions of dollars that was on local campuses at ticket sales suddenly became $4.5 billion of revenue being shared in broadcasting rights. And when they moved that progression over there, there's a question as whether or not the students should have been involved in that too. So I think there's also finger pointing at when the universities decided to up their game, get broadcasting rights, and get into a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Thank you for that. And I don't struggle with the fact that we need to put you in a position to be competitive. That I don't struggle with. I have always been that supporter. I struggle with what we're doing. And what area that I'm concerned about is I know that there's other areas that you have opportunity to take funds from and help recruit a student. I don't want that to be taken away from a student that may be going after a scholarship to get into UConn. And that money hurts that maybe that could have been used there. That is my only reservation. I know you can't say to me that'll never happen. I know that. But that is the concern that I have, that the foundation dollars or other revenue that comes into UConn is put together to help a star athlete get a little bit more when somebody gets nothing. And so that's the only struggle that I have. And I'm hoping that that whoever's got that choice makes the right decision for a student and not for a program. So,
I understand your concern.
thank you again, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you for a nice 2 wins last night. I got the flip between back and forth. So, scary in that second game. Whew.
Thank you, Representative Weir, followed by Representative Paris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think this question go back to you, David. You know, I'm intimately familiar with the Bleeding Blue for Good initiative. I've actually contributed to that and participated in some of those events. So to see how that affects the community and the students, how they're participating and they're getting, you know, part of that initiative involves community service and character, you know, beyond just playing the game. So that's been interesting to view. I want to go back to one of the, just to get a clarification, one of the earliest questions that was asked by one of my colleagues was talking about what the plan for revenue sharing is. You know, is there a detailed plan? And you were saying that we're kind of waiting on the legal, on Judge Wilkin to give her, you know, give her order. Is that, you know, just for a point of clarification, is that at that point, the legal precedent will be set? And I think to your point, not having the plan in place, if we put a plan in place now, it could potentially have to be shifted. Is that versus following her legal precedent, and then we'll have some guidelines, or maybe that goes back to you, sorry.
So to be clear, I would say that Judge Wilkin is going to approve a settlement. And so that doesn't necessarily create a precedent as we think about court case and different decisions, but she is going to create a model that other schools are going to look at and probably, again, probably wrong term, model off of that, right? They're going to use that, but we're looking at other models as well. Every school is doing that. And more importantly, UConn takes Title IX very seriously. And that's something that when we are looking at our models, we got to consider that. Not all schools do, but it's important that we don't know what the House settlement will look like. We don't know what the structure is, and nobody knows, I wish we did, what the right model is, come April 7th.
There's other things that are also going on at a significant level that could impact this. And that's why not getting out ahead of ourselves. And I think I'm very careful when I communicate to our head coaches, because if you put yourself in their position, they're all running their own businesses. They're not necessarily always concerned about the overall. And so when you communicate something to them, they take it very seriously and to heart, and they begin to implement off of that. And so I think we have to be very careful when we have the House settlement that is pending. We have discussions about a federal law that may be put in place that we have some of our federal people involved with. And so we are monitoring the landscape at the same time that we're trying to create several different scenarios that would be based off of what we think is going to happen. But at this point in time, I think it's too early to suggest that this is how we're going to do it, because that could create challenges for people if they start operating with an idea that this is how much I'm going to have to share, and then I come back 2 or 3 months from now and say we're changing the game.
Thank you. That clarification is very helpful. And bottom line is, we're creating here with this legislation, we're creating a foundation that you can work off of, and then things will have to be fluid as the details emerge. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Paris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Benedict, I appreciate you answering many of these questions. I also appreciate the bill before us. I mean, I do understand, and I hear my colleagues from the other side on some of their concerns around this, certainly around gender equity and potential Title IX issues and the impact on budgets and scholarships. I hear that. However, many of the folks, the athletes that you recruit likely don't come from wealthy backgrounds. Is that correct?
I couldn't speak to each individual's background. We don't do that kind of analysis, but I would not object to that statement.
I'll take another question if I might, sir. Okay. I have a cousin. She's married to a former Washington Commanders player. My uncle doesn't like him very much because he's not a Chiefs player. He'd be making a heck of a lot more money as a Chiefs player, but he was an orphan child. His mother was killed in a grocery store robbery. He went to college, didn't make any money in college, and it wasn't guaranteed that he was going to be a professional athlete. So this bill essentially, and this policy would essentially create economic opportunities for athletes who may not make it to the professional leagues, correct?
That is correct. And I would say that we have many of our student athletes are first generation college students. So to your point, yes, it will create an opportunity for people that they have not had previously.
Thank you. I wanted to be sure that that was made very clear for the record. And just one more question, if I might, Mr. Chair, be very quick. I'm also wondering about the competitive edge that this would allow for Connecticut schools, not just UConn, but all schools. Have you met with athletes that have said, because we don't offer any competitiveness in terms of economic opportunities for their playing in many of these leagues, that they've looked at other states as opposed to coming to Connecticut?
Well, in the current environment, we are not in a position to necessarily directly offer those things. But what I can tell you is that our coaches have communicated to me that there have been efforts that they've had in recruiting where individuals have looked elsewhere because we were not going to be in a position to meet what their expectations were.
That's very helpful. I appreciate those answers to the committee, and I appreciate the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. I'm looking to see if any of my colleagues, either here or online, have any additional questions. Representative Haddad.
Thank you. I think this is my last question, and usually when I read legislation, I can follow along pretty easily, but there is a question that I wanted to ask about, and I'm sorry, I have a bill copy that doesn't have line numbers on it, but I think it's at there's some additional language that you're asking to put into the statute at the end of section, I don't know, two, E. And it says, it starts by saying, it's a restriction on having other entities, I think, take action on a complaint, open investigation, other adverse action, et cetera, et cetera. It's 5 or 6 lines there. I'm going to direct this at Nate. You
Sure.
see the
Just to be
language?
clear, I think we're looking at E5.
E5, yes,
Okay.
exactly. Okay. Can you tell me what that language does and why it's necessary?
Sure. This is what we're looking for. If the House settlement does not occur and the University of Connecticut needs to move forward with the revenue sharing and participation in the market, which other states are going to be doing too, that the NCAA can't come back and punish us, but more importantly, can't punish a student and say, because you went to UConn and they're going ahead of the House settlement, you cannot play in a tournament, you cannot play in a game. And this is the same kind of laws that we're seeing in Virginia, Utah, Nebraska, and other states that are moving forward with revenue sharing.
And that's in the event that the House settlement is not approved?
Correct. If the House settlement's approved, the NCAA is going to bless it and we're going to move forward and there would be no investigations. So if the House settlement is delayed and other states are doing the recruitment piece and we can by law do it, the NCAA might say, we want to investigate you until the House is done. Unlikely, because so far, I mean, I think we all know the NCAA is what, 0-6 right now in court. So I don't know if they'd be moving forward on that, but just to make sure for protection administratively, just on the investigation side, that UConn and more importantly, UConn students wouldn't be punished.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. That finishes my questions.
Thank you. One quick question. I think this probably is for you, Nate. This is in your proposed amendment. And it's in the first section here with, it says student athlete means a student who currently attends or has agreed to attend. I am not an attorney. I wonder if we will need to work to tighten that up and if you would support that, whether it means signing a letter of intent or just how we kind of memorialize that somebody has agreed to attend. Is that just a verbal agreement or should that be in writing?
So I will tell you what I think it means to, and David can correct me, but generally what happens as you negotiate, you talk to a student, whether it's in the portal, coming out of high school, et cetera, you tell them that they should come to UConn, you make an offer to them. At some point, what we need to do is we have the grant and aid agreement. So they will sign the grant and aid agreement, which sets out, this is what your scholarship would look like. This is what your this is the commitment that UConn's making to you. And we would ask you to sign it to commit to attend UConn. And they sign that document. And I would say that at the point that they sign that document saying that I accept your scholarship and I'm coming to UConn, that they have agreed that that they will attend UConn. We would negotiate a deal with them on the NIL revenue piece. No payments would be made though until they're actually on campus enrolled.
I would add to that it's very hard to have a crystal ball right now, Senator Slapp, from the standpoint that it's very confusing. We have name, image, and likeness. We used to have this thing called the National Letter of Intent. And the National Letter of Intent was a big day every year when prospective student athletes would sign their National Letter of Intents, which would mean that they're formally committing to attend your school. Because of the environment and because of transfer legislation, which could be modified, a lot of kids are not signing National Letter of Intents anymore. And they really don't have much strength to them anymore because of the transfer portal, because a National Letter of Intent once signed used to obligate you to a university, and therefore there was transfer rules that were in place. Now you can sign a National Letter of Intent and transfer regardless. And so I would just caution us to make this too tight to the point where the environment evolves and we're back in a place where we're at a disadvantage. The reality of what we're trying to create is a situation where we just like everyone else in the country, will be having conversations from a recruitment standpoint. We will present student athletes with an opportunity from a financial aid standpoint. And if they agree to come to our institution, regardless of when they sign that agreement, that it will be in effect once they are enrolled on our campus.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. And as we look to, work on the language to get this out of committee, I think those comments are very instructive. I'm going to make a prediction that I think that this bill probably will get fast tracked and be approved pretty soon, because I think that there's nobody in the General Assembly, and this is speculation here, but I think I'm out on a fairly strong limb, and myself included, that wants to do anything that would undermine UConn's competitiveness, and not just UConn. We know it applies to other schools as well. And so I support that. I want to make sure that we give the coaches, UConn, and the student athletes every tool possible to compete and to win. My question is, once that happens, and we know that, let's say, hypothetically, that the university is getting $10 million of revenue, and let's say going forward, UConn will share, and I'm just making this number up, half with student athletes, right? We all agree that's a good thing. We need to do that to be competitive, et cetera. Of course, that means that the athletic department then has $5 million, if it's half, right, less of revenue coming in. So my question is, does that mean that the need is even more urgent to generate more revenue for the University of Connecticut and the athletic department? And what I know you're already working on that. I'm sure that's one of your top priorities. But how does that impact the university's kind of strategy in terms of whether it be looking at other conferences or or what's the approach to generate even more revenue? Because we know right now we're going to have to the university is going to have to share some with the student athletes.
Well, I'd love to have a deep dive conversation and get in the weeds with all the different things that we're doing to try to create more revenue, which one has to do with a facility not too far from where we sit here today. What will, I think, at some point in time be known as something other than the Excel Center. But Senator Slapp, at this point in time, there's no intent in going to the university and asking for more money to fund this. And at this point in time, we have not indicated, nor are we planning to cut other sports or cut other activities within our department to fund this, which many other universities are. We are trying to be entrepreneurial in how we approach funding, revenue sharing, and creating more money. Our NCAA financial report was just made public. We're in the best position that we've been since I've been at the helm as athletic director, almost 9 years, and our revenue streams are all increasing, which will provide us opportunities to use the additional revenue that we have to use for revenue sharing. And it may mean that we don't do other things and we have to make choices, but as we generate more revenue, we'll have more opportunities to share.
Thank you. Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here this morning. Appreciate your coming to speak with us. Just one question about the possible impact of the House settlement. There's a portion in the settlement that talks about that the settlement's going to institute defined roster limits, but remove the scholarship limits that have previously been in place through the NCAA. How will that impact some of the other sports at the university? Will it have an impact, and how so?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very significant part of the House settlement. And right now we are planning, because if you want to participate in revenue sharing, you have to opt in, and that would require you to meet what the new roster limits are and financial aid limits. Today, as we sit here, there are financial aid limits for every sport that the NCAA sponsors. There are no roster limits. So they are going to flip that. And moving forward, there will be roster limits, but no financial aid limits. And so if I can contextualize that and provide you an example with a particular sport, we'll use the sport of football, or excuse me, baseball. Baseball has an equivalency of 11.7 scholarships. So Jim Penders can only offer 11.7 scholarships to however many kids he has on his roster, and he can determine how many kids he has on his roster. Typically, that's around 40 individual players. And so he has 11.7 scholarships to share within 40 players. Moving forward, the roster limit for baseball under the new rules would be 34. So again, what every individual school currently carries on their roster is up to their individual school. Obviously, it has to comply with their roster management in Title IX from an equity and proportionality standpoint. But moving forward, we will have specific limits with teams. Football is going to go to 105. There are many teams around the country that carry 140. So there will be less opportunities moving forward from the standpoint of certain rosters. But it will allow you to provide more financial aid to your student athletes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Farrar.
Hi, thanks for being with us. I realize I missed some of the opening, but I do want to ask a question if it wasn't asked already, and I wanted to hear it personally. So one of the things I wanted to ask about in regards to the settlement and also this legislation is, can you speak to how the revenue sharing agreement that we might have, you know, with any athlete, or in regards to how a school might implement their revenue sharing across sports, including with scholarships, would be affected or consideration or consider Title IX specifically?
That was asked before, and so I try to describe a little bit right now. We are in essentially the Wild West, where everything in NIL is fast moving, and with regard to Title IX, that is a very dynamic time right now where we are seeing different models coming out. There has been no guidance on that. Nothing definitive has been set. So UConn, again, we not only, we've been following Title IX for 50 years. We plan to continue to do that. We understand its importance. And I think we're one of the forefronts of that, especially in women athletics and equity. And that we're going to continue to take that into consideration as we move forward with that, with the goal that what we know today is definitely going to change in February. And when we get to April, it'll probably be something completely different again.
So just to confirm, regardless of then what the settlement specifies, you're saying that UConn makes a commitment that no matter what's in that settlement, that any revenue sharing approach, any approach, as was noted, to increase scholarships would take Title IX into account.
Right. So any increases in scholarships, we have to follow Title IX. On the revenue side, it looks like that's the case as well, too. And so regardless, we have our state laws, we have Title IX, we're going to follow it. And we're going to make sure when we're looking at the revenue sharing that it's going to comply with that.
Thank you. Thank you for reconfirming that. Appreciate it. Thank you, the chair.
Thank you. Great. Mr. Benedict, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Thank you for your consideration.
Great. Thank you. And Nate, I believe you're going to stay, right? And testify in another bill? Right. Right. Do you want to stay there, or you can move over to the big chair, whatever you want? Oh, you're going to come up. Okay. Okay. So we have, Mr. Nolan and joining us as well. Okay. So, and this is, and when you testify, you may be planning on doing this, but if you can let the committee members know which piece of legislation you're going to be offering comments on, that'd be helpful. Thank you. And good morning. So.
Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the university in support of HB 6444, an act allowing the constituent units of the state system of higher education to enter into energy savings performance contracts. The bill seeks to amend Connecticut General Statute 16A-37X to allow the constituent units of higher education to solicit and enter into energy saving performance contracts directly. An energy savings performance contract is a partnership between an organization and an energy services company to reduce the energy usage and increase the operational efficiency. The ESCO company designs, installs, and guarantees the performance of energy conservation measures without the need for upfront capital cost. The process of identifying and selecting a qualified contractor for an ESPC is a resource-intensive competitive procurement process to promote energy efficiency and reduce the carbon footprint of state agencies. The original statute was enacted in 2011 and amended in 2016 and tasked the state agencies with developing a program to streamline much of the process for state agencies. The intent was to make ESPCs more accessible to state agencies, but UConn was the only state agency to successfully utilize the program due to the size and of the central campus. Due to limited interest, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Department of Administrative Services have ceased operating the program and have no plans for renewal at this time. As the statute currently stands, state agencies, including UConn and other institutions of higher education, are prohibited from pursuing an ESPC independently. Only municipalities have the flexibility to enter into these types of contracts on their own. Due to the state's announcement that it's not pursuing any new contract solicitations or contracts under the program at this time, UConn is requesting to be granted permission to pursue such contracts and is prepared to do so independently. UConn has realized an annual energy savings of $1.5 million annually since we entered into such an agreement in 2017 and are eager to solicit and enter into additional such agreements. The requested legislation would also extend the terms of an ESPC contract from 20 years to 30 years. This will allow us to do larger scale energy savings projects with an even greater potential to reduce UConn's carbon footprint and enhance the sustainability efforts. The benefits of the proposed legislation and having the ability to enter into these contracts would be an effective tool for UConn to meet its goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2030, increase efficiency costs effectively, and renew and enhance existing facilities without a significant capital outlay. Thank you for your attention as we urge passage of House Bill 6444, an act allowing the constituent units of the state system of higher education to enter into energy savings performance contracts. As always, we greatly appreciate your continued support of the University of Connecticut, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Nolan, thank you. I believe my co-chair Representative Haddad has a few questions for you.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. This committee doesn't often touch these sections of the statute, 16A. But I just wanted to take a moment just first to just applaud the university on its effort to reduce its carbon footprint, and you've got a pretty aggressive goal that's not too far away in 2030. So I appreciate that the intent of this legislation, as I understand it, is to help you engage private partners to help you achieve those energy savings and the goals regarding reducing your carbon footprint. Just a general question though about these kinds of arrangements. Universities are a pretty resourceful institution. There's lots of expertise there, and it's a well-resourced agency. It's got access to, in some instances, its own bonding authority, et cetera, et cetera. And so my question, I guess, is what is the advantage of going this route as opposed to identifying projects on your own that you can pay for with your own resources and then retain the entirety of the savings as opposed to sharing some of those savings with a private entity?
Yeah, the university does engage in a continuous improvement process that allows us to leverage our internal assets. We utilize things such as an internal revolving green fund, if you will. Our cogeneration facility that we installed in 2006 generates Connecticut Class 3 renewable energy credits. We utilize those to fund additional efforts to do some of the lower hanging fruit type projects, converting to LED, installing variable frequency drives on pumps and motors for efficiency improvements. So we leverage that on a continuous basis, and that works very well for small projects. But when we look at the exigental climate crisis and the need to accelerate and meet this 2030 goal, we need to apply this to larger, deeper dive type projects. So there's a component of our ask here is to also go to a 30-year term instead of a 20-year term, which aligns better with activities we're seeing, such as the federal program that does this, that's been utilized at the subbase in Groton and other military bases around the country. They utilize a 25-year term to allow them to do deeper infrastructure type work. And this is usually a more costly item, but it also comes with a life cycle expectancy of the work that you're doing lasting 40, 50 years. In some cases, a steam or condensate line or electric distribution system have a lifetime of 75 to 100 years. So this allows us to do these larger scale projects that can have a more defined and greater impact to the carbon reduction goals and the energy efficiency goals. So the reason that you would do that is the firms that specialize in this, and this becomes, the university does have some specialists. I have a small team that works with me of what the Association of Energy Engineers call certified energy managers. They do a very detailed engineering dive into these projects and verify that the measures are appropriate. The value of the firms is that they're doing this on a national basis. They have access to supply chains and also some philanthropic organizations that are a little more robust connections that we can leverage. So the intent of the university is to have a broad-based approach, using not only our internal resources, but any external ability to do so through philanthropic people who are very interested in mitigating the climate damage to the world, whether or not the United States is part of the Paris Agreement or not. There's a very strong interest in multiple sectors of the world to address these issues. And this is a broad-based approach that allows us to leverage all resources that are available.
And just so it'll help me moving forward, do you have an example of a project that you might undertake in Storrs or at one of the regional campuses that could sort of help me sort of understand just how all this gets put together and what kind of efficiencies might be on the table if you're able to execute this kind of an agreement?
Yeah, similar to our first project that we did, we addressed 24 of our large high energy research science buildings. We did deep dives into the building automation controls of those buildings to control fume hoods. If you're dealing with a dangerous chemical, you have an exhaust plenum in the building that removes any odors, dangers, etc. But that also has an impact on the warmed air inside the space. So we want to have an automated control system that ensures that we are applying that type of removal of any dangerous chemical, but at the same time, not taking all of the nice warmed air in a building out on a day like today when it's 20 degrees, because that's an energy cost to reheat that air in the building again. So those are deep dive efforts that we did in over 24 of our large science buildings. The other aspect of this on the infrastructure side is we took aged steam and condensate lines that have been in service for over 90 years, and we replaced those. And the energy savings by applying new insulation to an underground system reduces the heat loss. And if you're not losing heat in the ground as you're transporting it from your central plant to the building that's using that energy, you're using that energy where you want to use it and not having it lost. So those losses that are occurring in the system can be very significant, and the ability to return that water, it had multiple effects of reducing our energy usage, reducing the amount of fuel required to produce the energy in the first place, as well as saving water that was being lost through the condensate not returning to the plant.
Thank you for answering those questions. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.
Representative Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here and testifying. And I do agree that we need to continue this process in this manner. I do have quite a bit of pause on the change to the 30-year, it's 30-year payback, not 30-year contract. So when you check, so that energy efficiency can't be accomplished in 20 years. You want to bump that out to a potentially 30-year payback?
Yes, the university has been engaged in this since at least 2008 when I've been at the university. And during that time, we initially approached doing projects that had a 5-year return on your investment. This would be LED lighting, things like that. So we've accomplished pretty much all of those that are available for the campus. And now we're looking at and doing projects that have a 10 to 15-year payback. The first ESCO project we did was the first one that was reaching for these items that have a 20-year return on that investment. Obviously, when we look at these measures, we're taking a look. We're not going to replace a piece of equipment that has a 7-year life expectancy and have 20 years of payments for it. That would be nonsensical. But what we do look at is the infrastructure components, large electrical equipment, steamer condensate systems, underground water distribution systems. Many of these assets do have 75, 100-year lifespans. So in those cases, it does make sense to look at a longer payback period, and that's a lot more expected in a utility environment. Typically, a recent example would be our offshore wind. We looked at contracts for 20 years for the state. Last year, that was modified to be 30 years, and that was Connecticut, Rhode Island. Several of the states looked at this for an infrastructure development project. These longer terms of 30 years are not uncommon.
And Stan, that is the trend that we're seeing across the country, and even the federal government now is moving in that direction too.
Correct.
So this, I'll look into this a little bit more. If I can get examples of what it, taking back a 30-year payback on an investment, it's substantial just for, as the language reads here, just about components, just about wear and tear on items, just 20-year paybacks back. And this legislation isn't specific for your constituent unit. This legislation is for state and municipalities that would also be allowed to have contracts that go out to 30 years. So I'd be looking for more backup for that portion of it when an investment is made. I've done work in this field, so I know the LED conversions, the variable speed replacements and things like that. So it just seems I'd like to get more information, more backing to support that component of this legislation. So thank you again for your time, and know some of the programs that are taking that long to pay back.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Ware.
Thank you for being here today. I just have a couple of questions as I've read through the bill, and I also received a little bit of kind of the Cliff Notes description of what the goal of the program is. And correct me, I'm just going to give you my take on this. This is basically the universities accessing private or alternative funding for the capital outlay on the equipment or upgrades that you're making. And obviously the university or who's ever taking advantage of these services is going to be responsible for the payback. But my understanding is that the cost savings on those utilities, the increased efficiency will offset the capital costs. Is that the way I understand it? So that we're not
So
having
that is the intent of the program and how it functions.
Okay. Okay, so that on its face, it sounds good. And that's something I can get behind for sure. I guess the contingency in my world is always wondering, what if things don't go according to plan? What is the alternative if the equipment or these upgrades that we're making, if they fail within that 30-year time frame? Is this like a lease type?
I think part of it is once it's done, we have and this is in the statute already, but there's a contract mechanism that has a third party that does an audit of it. And along the way, if we're not capturing the actual savings that was promised to us, we have a clawback. And that's one of the nice things of the protections of this is we're using nonstop, not the taxpayer money. We're using private equity. We have accountability. And if it doesn't perform correctly, instead of asking for, additional money to fix it, we go back to them and say, it didn't live up to the expectations, and so we're going to have to take some of that money back.
And so from an equipment standpoint, that makes sense. And the accountability, I like that piece for sure. Is there any increase or additional, will there be any resources needed in manpower or labor as a result of, over time? Will we have to hire more people to maintain, upgrade? Will there be any anticipated additional people who need to be hired to manage the upgrades that we're looking to include here?
UConn currently has a number of staff that are familiar with this process, and it's part of our continuous and ongoing work to maintain our energy efficiency across the board and maintain our assets. Deferred maintenance does occur on a regular basis, and it does affect the systems. And obviously, anything that the university builds as part of our recent growth cycle has been approached as being LEED compliant buildings. And these usually include a lot of these retro commissioning or continuous commissioning efforts as part of that. So as part of our growth of the university, we have provided additional training to our existing facility staff. And currently we are appropriately staffed to manage the over 13 million square feet of assets that the university takes care of. So I would not expect additional staffing. And during the initial construction phases, we're typically relying on this ESCO company to bring in the appropriate staff to set up, commission, and then do it. And then we have, as Nate had mentioned, a third-party review that ensures that we are meeting the goals of the program.
Thank you, Representative. I do not see any other questions, so I think you are free to go. We appreciate your time. I'm sorry. Yeah. So great. Thank you very much.
We appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. We have one more person testifying from UConn. And so with my co-chair's indulgence, what I think I would do, even though we're past an hour and that we typically kind of hop to non-official, is that if we receive the testimony from Mona Lucas, who is joining us remotely, if she's, I see her there, yep, ready to go, then we can complete UConn's part of this public hearing. So Ms. Lucas, good morning. And if you could just make sure to let us know what piece of legislation you're testifying on, that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. Good morning. Honorable chairs, ranking members, and members of the Higher Education Employment Advancement Committee. My name is Mona Lucas, and I'm Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Policies and Strategic Initiatives at the University of Connecticut. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the university in support of Raised Bill 1112, an act prohibiting scholarship displacement. The University of Connecticut is supportive of the bill. Legislation that stands to benefit recipients of public or private scholarships who also receive other forms of financial aid awarded by the institution aligns with university affordability goals. The longstanding practice at the University of Connecticut will comply with the proposed legislation. Outside financial aid resources such as private or public scholarships are first applied towards students' unmet financial need, or, when applicable, to the unfunded portion of the overall estimated cost of attendance. It is only in circumstances when the outside private scholarship or public scholarship exceeds either the unmet financial need or the estimated cost of attendance that we reduce other forms of aid. In these cases, we reduce the least desirable form of financial aid first, such as a federal direct loan. Last year, 71% of UConn undergraduates applied for financial aid, and most of the students were determined to have financial need. Our gross financial need for fiscal 24 for those aid applicants totaled in excess of $400 million. And that equated to about an average need of about $31,400 per student. We are not in a position to meet that amount of financial need per student. So 65% of that unmet need, or about $290 million, was covered by grants and scholarships from a host of sources. And then about 21% was covered with federal student loans or with federal work-study earnings. The remainder had to be covered by students and families' personal expenses, or potentially, college savings plans, something like that, that is funds that are not controlled or awarded by the institution. So when we look at these statistics, it's just a reminder to us to maintain policies that do not negatively impact those who are financial aid recipients when they receive funding from external sources. Thank you again for your continued support, and I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Ms. Lucas, thank you very much for your testimony. Just looking to see if anybody has. Representative Acker.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for testifying. This is something I didn't know was even taking place. So this is an area where, as I understand, I guess that if financial aid to whatever level it is, whatever thousands of dollars, is that institutions have or could reduce that aid package if they received a scholarship for whatever given reason. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. If it is their policy to have such a practice, absolutely. Someone could win $1,000 PTA scholarship, and the school could decide that, well, you're bringing in this $1,000, so we're going to reduce the university grant that we gave you by the $1,000 that you received because of winning something through the PTA. And that practice is just a way, some schools, I believe, might then spread their dollars and try to, maybe someone who didn't win outside money or receive money from, outside entities, maybe they then take the $1,000 that they reduced and give it to a student who they had not been able to fund.
Well, that's not a bad practice. All right. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Ware.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate your words. I want to just get a point of clarification. Does this apply to, it says all higher education institutions. So are we talking private institutions, privately funded and privately run institutions, as well as state-run institutions?
That is that's my understanding. That if this raised bill were to pass, that all of us would have to comply.
Okay, thank you. And so you're in support of all institutions, whether private or public, this applying to all of them?
Oh, absolutely. What I would add, in some cases, there's a possibility that institutions have enough money to meet students' full financial need. And in those cases, they'll have to reduce if the student gets even more, because we wouldn't want where need-based aid is a factor, we can't go over a student's need. But for institutions who are in a position comparable to UConn, where we do not meet full need, it would be great if anything the student earns from the outside could be applied to their unmet financial need, or potentially reduce the student's need to borrow under the federal direct loan program.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I think the intent is laudable, for sure. I think that on this committee, we have purview certainly over higher education, generally speaking, and I look forward to future conversation here about, I have concern with us mandating what a private institution can or can't do in relation to some of the grants that they're offering. So look forward to future conversation, but I'll consider that.
Thank you, Representative. Ms. Lucas, I do have a question that just came to mind. And, we spent a lot of time the previous hour talking about ensuring that we, the General Assembly, this committee, doesn't do anything that would put the University of Connecticut at a competitive disadvantage, compared to other universities and other schools across the country. Have you been able to, and I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot, it's always something you can get back to me with this information if you don't have it off the top of your head, but what your peer schools, universities do related to scholarship displacement? I mean, because it is it's a competitive landscape, right? In terms of offering scholarships and attracting students and retaining them. So I'm just wondering what, if we were to pass this, how would UConn compare to the other universities which you all compete with for students?
Yeah, I do not have that information on hand, easy enough to get, just reaching out, and doing a bit of benchmarking with our peers. So I'm happy to get back to you on that.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you. Yes, Senator Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mona. Mona, could you just go over again what the other universities do regarding a scholarship that a student may receive, and how they may reduce their scholarship from their university should they receive something from the Rotary Club or whomever?
Sure. And this is what other institutions can do if they decide that this is the approach they choose to utilize. What they can do if they have a policy that allows them to reduce aid, gift aid, so scholarships or grants that a student may get, should the student get aid from the outside. The process would be, so the institution awards a student, I'll pick a nice round figure, $10,000 in a ABC University scholarship. And then the student wins the Rotary Club scholarship and a PTA scholarship for an additional $5,000. And even if the student were not over their financial need, which would require the school to adjust some things, the school could have a policy to say, well, because you got $5,000 from the outside, we're going to take away $5,000, give it to someone else. You still have $10,000 of free money. What I don't know is how many institutions utilize that practice. I don't have any knowledge, factual knowledge on that. It's just an option they could use if they chose.
It seems a little unfair to the student who may have earned various outside scholars, Rotary Club, PTA, whatever. They've been promised $10,000 in financial aid, regardless of what the stack looks like. And now, all of a sudden, after the promise has been made, yeah, I'm going to go to your university or your college, all of a sudden, they've got this extra scholarship money that they have received because of most likely, the good work that they've done through their, in high school or, academically. And now it seems like they're being penalized by that $5,000 being taken away.
Sure. That's why I'll use UConn as an example. We don't do this, but let's say we were in a position where we did want to do this. What we would do is say up front in our consumer information that should a student receive external scholarships in addition to what the school has awarded, those scholarships will be used as a replacement for a portion of whatever we've given the student. So it would have to be shared up front so that the student and family knew that, oh, wait a minute, if I get outside money, they're going to automatically take away from the $10,000 that they gave me. Then if, family could use that information to make their decision as to whether that institution is a good match for them or not. I suspect that's a reason UConn has had the longstanding practice that is in place, particularly given that we are not in a financial position to meet a student's full financial need. So anything they can win through external means is actually good news to us because the gap we are unable to fill could be filled with these outside private or public scholarships that the students have won. Our only concern, and hopefully other institutions as well, would be we don't want students to make money because they're students. So the piece in the raised bill that speaks to not going over cost of attendance, that's a common practice, I think, at many institutions out, but at UConn, that's one that, okay, if UConn awards a student a full cost of attendance scholarship, that means we're giving them enough money to cover their direct educational expenses that show up on the fee bill, tuition fees, room and board, a books and a supply allowance, in addition to personal and transportation allowance, which is one of the indirect expenses, because we recognize they need, the average college student has to have some money for their personal needs. So if we give a student that amount of money and they win external money, well, in that case, they are over cost of attendance. And that was something also that we liked about the raised bill, that we would be prohibited from layering on money once a student has the full cost of attendance covered. So for us, in our interpretation of the raised bill, it sounds like the preference is, unless a student exceeds their financial need, which then gets into some federal regulatory requirements where we have to make adjustments. But short of that, if they earn external scholarships, our plan is to continue with our long-standing practice, which is apply that money towards that gap that we were unable to fill with funding.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. This is Representative Ackert again for a second time, and I apologize for the follow-up, but now the discussion has, if an individual, a student and or parent has cash in a bank account, savings account, is that calculated into this financial grant?
Yeah, the students, yes, or into overall eligibility. And so on the FAFSA, I believe one of the questions asked about a family's resources, savings, and I don't have the question in front of me, but something that links to what you're asking, how much money do you have today while you're filing the FAFSA, and then some other questions. And that's factored into the need calculation to help determine what the formula says that the family should have available to help with educational expenses. Certainly, all families are not going to agree with the calculation. When it all is said and done, the income and savings, and in some cases assets, go into the formula, and we're given an index number of sorts, which in a way represents, okay, this family should be able to contribute at least $5,000 towards education for this particular student who's the applicant. Or in some cases, the formula spits out, this family has no money to contribute towards higher education for this student. And that would be a student who was determined to be a full need student. The calculation has been run and there's nothing for the family to contribute.
Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought if you had money on hand, and this is essentially what's happening. I can see how the colleges are acting, is that at the time that you reported on your FAFSA paperwork that you didn't have $10,000 to apply, but after you've come to school, you now have exactly that much, that a given amount of money to use toward your education from the grant. So they've been deducting it from that because that's what would have been filed on your FAFSA form prior to you getting in school. So I can see why that's been applied that way. So I'll have further discussions. If I need to reach out, I will. Thank you again for your testimony. Thank you again, Mr. Chair, for the second time.
Thank you, Representative. I think we may have lost Lucas. She's possible. There she is. Okay, you were frozen for a little bit.
Oh.
You're back. So great. Let me just see if anybody else has any questions. Representative Haddad.
I don't know if this is going to be a quick question or not. You have to be careful when you ask a question because you know how long the answer is going to be. I'm looking ahead at some of the other testimony that's being submitted by other institutions, and many of them are sort of raising a concern around, the distribution of the state scholarship money, the Roberta Willis Scholarship, through the Roberta Willis Scholarship Program. My recollection, my hope, and what I thought was happening is that the legislature had fixed, or was attempting to fix, the schedule for the Office of Higher Education to send notices to both students and also to institutions about the money that would be available through the Roberta Willis Scholarship Program. Some institutions seem to be implying in their testimony that they're not getting that information soon enough, and that they are packaging students prior to understanding whether or not those same students are going to be getting a Roberta Willis Scholarship. I imagine it might be the need-based portion that gets allocated directly through the institution. More likely, it may also include the need merit portion that is awarded directly from the Office of Higher Education. Can you give me a status report from your perspective on where we are in terms of getting information from the Office of Higher Education around allocations for the Roberta Willis Scholarship?
Sure, I'll share, well, I'll respond and then happy to follow up to provide additional information. My understanding is the need-based allocation piece of information isn't received yet in a timely enough manner for schools to be confident when they go out with their initial aid offers, depending on when they send those aid offers out, that they are going to have an allocation of XYZ. So it puts them in a situation where either they can use an estimate of what they had last year and factor that into their strategies, hoping for the best, or if they aren't in a position to hope for the best, then they have to wait until they get formal confirmation of what their annual allocation is. And so that then puts them at a disadvantage because potentially their initial aid offers have to go out without the Roberta Willis money or the value of that money, because it's too risky financially to, put aid offers out. And then if you find later that the allocation is less than you expected, then you're on the hook for that other money. So my understanding is that is still a challenge. But I'd like to circle back with our aid director to see if what I can say for UConn, our strategy discussions start in December, and we have to finalize our strategies for the next year's incoming class by late January, the end of January. So that's where we are today, well, tomorrow. And we're using estimates on what we think we might get to build our strategy.
And so in terms of the need portion of Roberta Willis, you use an estimate of what you think you'll receive from the Office of Higher Education. You will make those awards. You include that money in your financial aid packages. And if there is a differential or a delta, then what happens then?
Then we fund the difference. So that's, another reason why, because we, clearly our budget, university budget and CFO have given us what our allocations, so to speak, is for the year of university funding that we can use for need-based aid or merit-based aid, whatever we have. So if we're not conservative, our only option is then to, we have to fund it because we can't retract offers once they're out there. So we do use conservative estimates, but yes, we put in for that reason and others, as you may be aware of. So we put the money out there because we need the student to see the maximum we have to offer so they can make their decisions. And then we go back in after the fact and, make official Roberta Willis Awards after we receive our allocation.
Yeah, we could have a long conversation about this because, I mean, obviously this is the state scholarship program, and, it's tens of millions of dollars statewide. That's provided to both public and private institutions. And, it's been our effort and our sort of attempt to try to resolve this issue by having an earlier payment schedule. It sounds like we still have some work to do there. I think that
Yeah.
that's going to be the basis of some concern that's raised by other institutions around scholarship displacement. We'll see how that goes. But thank you for your response. I'm likely to follow up with you and with the Office of Higher Education about that schedule. Thank you.
Okay, absolutely.
Ms. Lucas, thank you very much for your time. I don't see any other questions, so have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Okay, next on our list is Christian Thomas from the Yale College Council Financial Policy Team. Christian's the director and is joining us remotely. Christian, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Slapp, and thank you, committee members. My name is Christian Thomas, and as Senator Slapp said, I am the director for the Yale College Council's Financial Policy Team, but I'm also the president of the Yale College Democrats. And today, I come to you on behalf of both of those organizations. Committee members, I ask that you imagine yourself to be a student at Trinity College, whose cost of attendance is $67,000 per year. Imagine with Trinity's resources, they determine that your family can afford to pay $20,000 per year, so they offer you a financial aid package of $47,000. So you work hard over the summer before college, during spring semester before college, and receive a scholarship from, say, the United States Senate Youth Program of $10,000 and the Taco Bell Foundation for another $10,000, meaning that you raked up $20,000 in external scholarships. And this is something that happens across the state to support your higher education. But instead of Trinity College allowing you to use this money towards your tuition, allowing you to use the $20,000 to cover the difference and what you would have to pay, instead, the scholarship money is absorbed by the institution, and you are required to figure out how to pay the additional $20K through loans, through work study, or whatever other means necessary. You could receive scholarships adding up to even more than $67,000, more than the cost of attendance at Trinity. You could receive $100,000 of scholarships per year, yet as a student, you would still be required to pay $20,000 per year, and Trinity College would absorb the other scholarships. Representatives, senators, this is unfair. Students work hard for their external scholarship money. I have personally worked hard to earn tens of thousands of dollars in external scholarship money, yet it is inaccessible to hundreds of us across the state. Hundreds of students attending universities like Wesleyan, Quinnipiac, and Yale, alongside Trinity. Join the practices of 6 other states around the nation, including California, Maryland, Minnesota, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Washington State in banning this practice. According to a 2021 survey by Student Beans, scholarship displacement, and I apologize for not mentioning earlier that this is referring to the Scholarship Displacement Bill, Senate Bill 1112, featured in Forbes, this article found that 50% of US college students who receive private scholarships experience scholarship displacement around the United States. This is particularly concerning given that nearly 500,000 students in Connecticut alone have accumulated nearly $17.5 billion in student loan debt. Help us to alleviate this debt in our state by allowing students to actually use the scholarship money that they've received and apply that to their cost of attendance at institutions. Senators, scholarship displacement is an unfair practice that renders outside scholarships completely ineffective for students in many of our institutions and limits the affordability of higher education. I will be emailing all of you a letter signed by the Yale College Council President, Yale College Council Vice President, Yale College Council Speaker of the Senate, Yale College Council Events Director, Chief Financial Officer, the founders and presidents of the Yale First Generation Low Income Advocacy Movement, members of our first year class council, and members of our Rural Students Alliance at Yale, who have all been affected or personally seen many of their peers affected by scholarship displacement and want to end the practice. I encourage you all to vote in support of this bill, and I appreciate the comments of our former testimony giver from UConn who also supports this bill. Thank you, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Christian, thank you for your testimony. Looking to see if any of my colleagues have any questions. I don't see any, but thanks again for waiting for a little bit. Oh, okay. Hang on. Senator Martin does have a comment or question.
No, no question, but just to let you know, you did a great job testifying here.
Thank you, Senator Martin.
Great. Have a great rest of your day, Christian. Thanks again.
Thank you, Senator Slop.
Okay, up next, Elaine Mintz. She's going to be joining us, which is from Fairfield County's Community Foundation, I believe. And if you could just let us know, I think I do know what you're testifying on, but if you could let everybody else know which bill, that'd be great. And good morning to you.
Good morning, Representative Haddad, Senator Slapp, Representative Bronco, Senator Martin, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Elaine Mintz. I'm Vice President of Strategy and External Relations at Fairfield County's Community Foundation. We represent the 23 towns and cities in Fairfield County, and our mission is to partner with our community to create a Fairfield County where everybody has an equitable opportunity to thrive. We are one of the region's largest scholarship providers in Fairfield County. We manage over 150 scholarship funds and award more than $1 million annually to hundreds of graduating seniors and college students. I'm here today to support Senate Bill 112, an act prohibiting scholarship displacement, a harmful practice that reduces students' financial aid awards by the same amount of private scholarships that they receive. This practice leaves students with no net financial benefit, undermining their hard work in obtaining these scholarships. We were pleased last year that the General Assembly passed a new law requiring transparency around scholarship displacement, and we thank the committee for your leadership on this. However, it remains unclear how this law has been implemented, and we believe the practice of scholarship displacement should be banned altogether. Scholarship displacement unfairly harms students who are low income and who rely heavily on financial aid to access higher education. With college tuition and fees skyrocketing over the past 2 decades, students depend on multiple funding sources to finance their education. A 2021 national study showed that 56% of students relied on scholarships to pay for college, with half of these students experiencing scholarship displacement. Banning this practice ensures that students receive the full benefit of their scholarships, advancing educational equity and closing opportunity gaps. As part of the foundation's internal practice, we prohibit the displacement of scholarships when they are awarded to schools. Last year, we had to defer the scholarships of 3 students after schools notified us they were going to displace the awards. Enforcing our policy is really challenging, though. It's often unclear whether schools honor our policy or displace the scholarships without our knowledge. A state-level ban on this practice would significantly help young people achieve the education they rightly deserve. Prohibiting this practice also protects donors' intentions to increase educational opportunities for our region's students. Many donors establish scholarships to help students cover debt or cover critical expenses like books, housing, and transportation. Banning this practice ensures that donors' philanthropy fully benefits students while protecting the rights of students to receive the full support that they've earned. Again, thank you so much for raising this bill. For more information, please see our testimony that we've also submitted, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I had just one or two quick follow-up questions. And one of them actually was just about answered in your testimony, but I just want to ask a clarifying point. Your practice is that if you learn that a scholarship that you're awarding is going to be displaced, that I use the word deferral, you defer the scholarship?
We deferred it in the last three cases last year, we deferred it, hoping that if the student's financial situation changed, they would be able to receive that scholarship the following year, but we don't know. It could be displaced altogether, but that's one way for us to have a little bit of control.
Right. One of the, my colleagues here, had mentioned earlier, some, trepidation or cautiousness, about making this apply to both public and private institutions. And I guess I'm curious to know from your perspective, what the overall impact of that would be. Because it occurred to me that if the rules weren't the same across different types of institutions, then private funders of scholarships would begin to limit the awards to students that were only going to institutions where they knew their scholarships would not be displaced. Is that a fair enough
Yeah, I think that's a
assessment?
fair.
That sounds like what your practice is already.
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. I think donors are unaware. We talked to our donors about it last year and many of them were stunned,
Mhm.
To find out that their money wasn't going, and we don't know what the schools are doing, whether they're actually using that money to benefit other students or it's going into their endowment. And I'm sure our donors would not be happy about that.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I understand. It's like you want your dollars to be effective.
Right.
Right. And if you're awarding it to a student who you know is going to attend an institution that does not prohibit scholarship displacement, well, then I'm guessing that might give you some pause about making the award to that student
Right.
as opposed to a student. I mean, is
Yeah.
that in effect what is? I'm curious. Is that what happens during the scholarship awarding process?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's something we could look into
Yeah.
and get that answer for you.
Except that we know that you have a deferral program, and so if I guess whether you know before or after you make the award, if you know that the scholarship is going to be displaced, you don't follow through on the award.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
okay.
Well, when our awards go out, there's a letter that says that they can't displace it. But again, it's
Yeah.
really hard for us to enforce that.
Yeah. Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my only second question was just around this, this provision that is in the legislation that's currently written about what happens when a student may already have, well, I'll call it a full ride to a college or institution. Because the legislation in that instance says that once that student has financial aid offer on the table and scholarships, and I suppose we could be careful to make sure that does not include student loans. But that once all of those costs are being met with allowances for books and transportation and other incidental costs, that in that instance, the institution would be allowed to displace the scholarship. Does that seem like a reasonable provision to you, or you feel like that practice should be prohibited as well?
It sounds reasonable. I mean, I think the testimony that we just heard is more the norm, and what you're talking about is more the exception.
Mhm.
That most students, and I was getting a little triggered thinking about filling out FAFSA forms when my kids went to school. Most students who apply for financial aid, when you get the package, you're like, really? They expect that we can pay this much money? I think most students are in that category, and that most universities are not covering all expenses associated with college.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with that. I think that the number of instances that might occur are probably few and far between. But at the same time, we felt that I'm not sure it's an unreasonable exception to the scholarship
Right. Yeah,
displacement rule.
no, it sounds fair. It would be like the full ride with everything, books,
Yeah.
transportation, all expected costs.
Right.
Yeah.
The first part of our, frankly, the first part of our hearing today, the first hour or so was talking about a category of students who participate in Division I athletics, and many of
Right.
whom have exactly that kind of a package. And so, at the University of Connecticut, where they have something like 20,000 students. I mean, there were probably, hundreds, if not 1,000 or more who fall into that category. I guess I'm just,
Yeah.
curious to know if that's what, what we're talking about. But thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. And I'll see if there are others who have questions. First, Senator Martin, and then followed by Representative Ackert, and then followed by Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Elaine, thank you for testifying. So let's talk about a freshman received a package. They get this scholarship after the package. Now they are displaced, let's say $5,000. But this money that they receive externally is only for 1 year. So they were displaced $5,000. You said that you don't know where it goes. Different schools could go into endowment, and I'd like to know where else it could go. But to this question, so the following year, they're back at school, they do the FAFSA form all over again. And that $5,000 that they had the freshman year is no longer there.
Right.
What happens there? Is there a carryover?
Well, I think that's where we deferred. So
You guys
in the
deferred.
rare instance where we hear from a college or university that they do displace, if we defer and their financial situation changes, then they may be able to hold on to that scholarship for that year. But in most cases, the student would apply all over again for financial aid. And then I think they would make that calculation. Do they go through the hard work of applying for scholarships, knowing that it could be displaced? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So part of the package, most of the time, is a loan. They receive this external money. It's applied towards a deduction in the loan amount.
Right.
Is that okay? Is that,
It's not.
I guess
yeah,
it's
I
not
mean, I think
backable.
if you're gonna displace, some universities have a policy that will say, we'll displace the loan first. So if you get a package of $7,500 in a loan and $75 in a grant, they'll use the scholarship to bring the loan down first. And I would say that's probably a better policy than, hitting the grant.
But are there universities that apply it to the grant first?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think there's any universality that, but it would be a better practice for them to.
Are you aware of any, when they do the displacement, the funds that are displaced? You gave us an example that it may go into an endowment. Can you give us other examples that you're aware of?
Yeah, I just think it's a little bit of a black hole when, they displace as to where. I think some colleges will make the case that we'll displace the scholarship and then that money can go to help other students. But you'd have to do like a forensic accounting
Sure.
to
Okay, thank you.
find that out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yep.
Representative Eckert.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Elaine, thank you for being here testifying. So and thank you for what you do for your scholarship. I provide 2 very small scholarships to 2 high schools. And it goes into a fund. And I believe that you directly send the money to the college of it
Yes.
that they're attending, correct? It doesn't go to the students, so they know exactly what scholarship they're getting. And
Yep.
and I was always told that there are certain schools that double the grants. I've never heard of them doing the opposite. So they said, oh yeah, there's some schools that'll match yours. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know. So I said, great. Didn't know that they were literally maybe displacing them. Okay. So I wanted to make sure more how is the mechanics work. So the money goes directly to the school.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Elaine. Thanks
Hi.
for being here. Again, recognize you can't speak for everyone, but I'm just kind of curious in you sharing the experience of the Fairfield County Community Foundation. Certainly, we have other community foundations in our state that also give out significant numbers of scholarships. Are you aware that they're also in this circumstance, and do they take on this approach of deferrals, and how is I'm kind of curious what you're kind of hearing in the philanthropy community beyond just yourselves that we might learn from as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know there's a concern and I'm happy to, we're such a collegiate group that I'm happy to ask and send a memo to you with an answer.
That would be great. I think just having a better scope of the statewide impact would
Yep.
help all of us. So if you're willing to do that, I think that would be greatly
Yeah.
appreciated.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yep.
to the chair.
Thank you. Representative Weir.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. And forgive if you don't know the answer to the question, but you're here as our expert panelist here. Is there anything, and my colleagues can correct me, but is there anything currently in statute that prohibits an institution of, mandates an institution of higher education from this displacement activity? So-
In Connecticut, no.
So-
There's, you passed a law last year to require higher education institutions to be transparent about what their policies are. But again, we don't know how that's been implemented. There's no law to prohibit it, the practice.
I misspoke, not,
Okay.
not prohibit, mandate. So in other words, if an institution chooses to let the student, I imagine, does our law permit a higher education institution to allow the student to keep the entire, to keep all the money? And some may choose to absorb it, like we heard testimony, but is there anything that allows a university to use that discretion? There's nothing
Yeah.
that prohibits them from using discretion?
I'm not aware. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. We'll flush this out further.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Oh, Representative Martin, of course, you just told me you had another question, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm
Very
sorry.
good.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Elaine, the example here. Application, FAFSA, scholarship. Here's the stack and it's presented, the awards presented to the student. Student acknowledges, yes, I'm going to go to your school. All of a sudden, you got external scholarships coming in. And then there's a displacement that takes place. I think the argument from some universities or colleges is that had we known about this $5,000 of displaced money, or excuse me, of external money, that our package would have been
Would have been
different.
different.
What do you say to that?
I think I would go back to what the EFC, the expected family contribution, when you go through the financial aid when you go through the financial aid process and the university comes back with what you can contribute, the expected family contribution is usually way lower than what the family can actually contribute. It's what the student just described from Trinity. And so I think that's the case.
So I dreaded pushing that button after filling out the FAFSA form with my children. I had 3 in at one time, and I dreaded because with that number coming up, how am I supposed to pay that?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
All right.
testimony. We
Thank you.
appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you.
All right, our next person to testify here is David Gabri from the Wellington Scholarship Foundation, Dollars for Scholars. David, good afternoon.
I
How are
would
you?
have said good morning, but good afternoon, yes. I feel like a lot of what I'm going to say is redundant to some of the stuff you've already heard, so feel free to tell me if you've heard this before. Mr. Chairman, ranking members, members of the committee. My name is Dave Gabri, and I'm from Wellington, Connecticut, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Wellington Scholarship Foundation, Dollars for Scholars. We are a 503c corporation registered with the state of Connecticut and a local chapter of Scholarship America, a nationwide organization. I'm here to address and support Senate Bill 1112. Our group raises donations from its local residents and businesses in order to provide scholarships to graduating seniors and others from Willington who are seeking post-secondary education. Scholarship displacement occurs when a student receives a scholarship after their initial financial award, and the college or university reorganizes that institutional package, often leading to a net zero gain for the student. When a student receives a scholarship from a provider other than the school, they are required to report it. This information results in a reduction of the funds from their financial package, frequently from grants, sometimes from loans. Colleges claim they do this in order to free up funds for students requiring financial aid who may not have received financial from outside sources. However, in effect, what's really happening here is you're penalizing the students who have sought out and acquired funds from outside sources, and in some instances, having a negative impact on the financial package as a result of those outside scholarships, even when they have unmet needs. This leaves the students wondering if applying for a scholarship and winning them is even worth it, as they're just being penalized. It also defeats the purpose of organizations like ours, who offer scholarships by negating their contributions to the students for whom they have chosen for the purpose of their scholarships and reallocating those funds for the purpose of the college or the university. Residents and businesses who make donations to our foundation have questioned the value of our scholarships if colleges just displace the money for their own discretionary use. As I heard earlier from the gentleman from Yale, there are currently 6 states that ban scholarship displacement: California, Maryland, Minnesota, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Washington. Arizona, Illinois, and Wisconsin have pending legislation to do the same. In October of 2023, the Connecticut Office of Legislative Research produced a study on college displacement. The analyst Jessica Callahan produced a report, and I'd like to make a couple of comments and notes out of her report. There are no state laws or regulations on scholarship displacement at Connecticut colleges or universities. In general, Connecticut colleges and universities ask students to report any outside scholarships, but they do not have institutional policies regarding scholarship displacements, and the reporting of external scholarships is based on their institutional policies, not state or federal laws. The Board of Regents of Higher Education, BOR, which makes policies and rules for governing the Connecticut State University system, the Community Technical College system, and the Charter Oak State School, collectively known as the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities, reports no system-wide policies regarding scholarship displacement. According to the Connecticut Conference of Independent Colleges, CCIC, which represents 15 accredited nonprofit institutions, since institutions are generally not allowed to award federal or financial aid beyond the total cost of attendance, the financial aid offices asked to be notified of scholarships made directly to the students or the university, and individual institutional policies determine if those scholarships are treated as a direct add-on or used to reduce the aid. As we heard from Mona Lucas, UConn asks its students to report its outside scholarships that they receive to the financial office, and according to the director, a student's outside financial funds are added to the financial aid package to reduce any unmet financial need. Depending on the unmet financial need, if other forms of financial aid must be reduced or canceled, the financial aid office starts with the federal work-study employment and then federal student loans. The university states that grants and scholarships are reduced only if the student's outside awards exceed the student's unmet financial need, financial work-study amounts, or need-based financial loans. My organization, Willington Scholarship Foundation, and many other chapters of Scholarship America here in Connecticut, ask this city to consider this bill that would prohibit scholarship displacement in instances where students have unmet needs. We urge this committee to protect those students and organizations like ours from the predatory practices of colleges and universities who take scholarships and use them for their own discretionary purposes. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
David, thank you very much for your very articulate and powerful testimony. You did a great job highlighting this issue. So see if any of my colleagues have any comments or questions. Senator Martin.
Thank you. Dave, thanks for coming and testify once again. You were here last year. Talk to me a little bit, or to the committee here, regarding the organization specifically. For those kids that are displaced, do you guys, how do you help them, or what happens to the students once you hear that they've been displaced? Are you guys doing anything in addition to help them?
We've been around for over 30 years. Scholarship America much longer. And over those 30 years, we've handed out hundreds and hundreds of scholarships, both merit-based, need-based, one-time scholarships, as well as renewables. Many of the students that we've given scholarships to have come back to us and said that the money we gave them just got displaced out of the financial aid package from the university that they've chosen. We give out our scholarships prior to knowing what schools are under consideration by the students. We're doing that award process right now as we speak. Many of the students will let us know later on who the schools they've chosen are, because we will in fact write the checks out to the schools and not to the students themselves. There is little that our organization can do specifically if a school chooses to displace the scholarship we've given. If a student knows that he's got is fully funded, we do offer them the ability to defer the award that we have prepared for them. In many instances, students receiving money in their first year, if it's a one-time award, they don't necessarily have as much money in their subsequent years. So they do have the opportunity to defer, but as we heard, we have no organizational ability to stop the schools or the universities from displacing the money from financial packages they've gotten. We receive the donations from our residents and from businesses and around the town. And they've come to us and they've said, why are we doing this? In the instance where the students are attending state schools, UConn, they're not being displaced. In many instances, we have students who attend schools here in Connecticut as well as outside of the state of Connecticut, and they're being displaced. We're hoping that by passing this ban here in Connecticut, we will be added to the list of states that don't allow it, and make schools here in Connecticut much more appealing to the students that we're offering our scholarships to.
So Dave, so you got an idea of who the universities are that are displacing? And
Mostly they're the private institutions.
and then you're knowing that, how do you determine to defer to another year?
What we tell the student when we announce the awards to the students, like I said, it's frequently before they've made a final decision. We have a conversation with them about displacement. We let them know what it is, and we tell them that they can and should request of the schools they're considering what their displacement policy is, so that they can make an informed decision about where they want to go that will have an impact on their financials.
So before they commit to a school, you're letting them know, hey, you got this Wellington scholarship,
Correct.
but we want to put you on notice that you should ask regarding their displacement policy.
Correct.
I had a question regarding, did I hear you say that Connecticut does not have a statute regarding displacement? Currently, these are all policy university policies that we're dealing with?
Scholarship displacement is 100% up to the financial aid offices of the of the colleges and universities in
Wow.
Connecticut. There are no laws on the books other than, as noted, last year, the bill was passed to make it a little more transparent. The colleges and universities are supposed to let students know that any financial aid or scholarships they receive from private organizations might offset their financial aid package.
One last question. Why are the students not just receiving the $2,000 scholarship instead of that money going to the university? It sound what I heard today was these scholarships are given to the universities or the colleges they go to. Why is it not being given directly to the student?
We we make the awards and determinations as to who we're going to give money to and how much long before they've made a decision on the schools that they're going to select. Once they've made that decision, they let us know and we write the check to the school. My understanding is, and I stand corrected, there are tax implications to us giving direct money directly to the students as opposed to giving a scholarship to the school.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks, Senator. One question for you, David. You use the term like predatory when it comes to the practice of these, mainly, I guess you're saying private schools, which is strong language. I'm not necessarily taking a position one way or another, whether that's accurate, but we're going to have somebody come up after you from the University of Hartford, who I would imagine would disagree with that characterization. So can you just kind of put a finer point on why you think this is these practices are predatory?
I use that word discretionary. It is my opinion that it's predatory because the schools do not make their policies known. They do not go out of their way to let the students know what they have in mind or what their plans are. They wait till they know what the money's coming in, and then they make their decisions on how they want to use it. If they were much more transparent and upfront so that the students could make a more informed decision, I wouldn't think it would be predatory. But many schools don't make that information upfront, even though a law was passed last year, which I think states that they're supposed to tell the students that private scholarships could be displaced.
Thank you, David. Looking to see if there's any questions or comments. I don't see any. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Up next is Catherine Pizzuti from the University of Hartford. And let's see, I'm looking around to see if Catherine's still here. And okay, she is going to be remote. So Catherine, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me here. Obviously, my name is Catherine Pizzuti, and I am the Executive Director of Financial Aid at the University of Hartford. Logically, I am here to share testimony on the Scholarship Displacement Bill, SB 1112. I would like to talk a little bit about some of our practices as it relates to scholarship displacement, and then talk a little bit about why the University of Hartford opposes this particular bill. First and foremost, I'd like to kind of lay the groundwork on who we are as an institution and why I think that is important. At the University of Hartford, between 35 and 40% of our students are considered Pell Grant eligible. So based on the results of the federal FAFSA form, these students are demonstrating the highest possible need. So we are serving a population of students that need funds to be able to attend institutions both at the public sector, but more importantly in the private sector. As of today, we have 1,403 full-time, so students taking 12 credits or more per academic semester, of students from the state of Connecticut who have filed a FAFSA form, and we've awarded them about $42 million in institutional financial aid to help them attend the University of Hartford. And of those 1,403 students, 619 of them are federal Pell Grant eligible, again, demonstrating that they have high financial need. I want to start by sharing that the University of Hartford very rarely displaces a private or external scholarship. So we are not a private institution that is practicing scholarship displacement for these external scholarships, so the scholarship organizations that you have heard from. The only time this is happening at the University of Hartford is when federal regulatory guidance is requiring us to do this. And the two times that that happens is when this external scholarship is going above their demonstrated financial need based on the results of the FAFSA, and we're therefore required to do that, or when that external scholarship is putting them over their total cost of attendance, which includes both billed and not billed costs to the institution. Therefore, the student would get a refund in their pocket to, beyond what we expect their expenses to be. In these rare cases, we still try to find ways to help minimize debt. So sometimes students are awarded a subsidized loan or an unsubsidized loan through the U.S. Department of Education. We would first attempt to reduce those loans to help make more room in their total cost of attendance or make more room in their need level before we would go ahead and reduce any type of institutional or other grant funds. So it is our policy to not reduce grants and scholarships for those external funds in any way that we can. In fact, as an institution that doesn't meet 100% of need, we have to encourage students to be applying for these private and external scholarships. Just last night, I was on a webinar, a virtual session for our incoming students to talk to them about the financial aid process. And I spent a good five or so minutes talking about and encouraging students to apply for these external scholarships and talking to them about how that brings down their bottom line to attend the institution and helps them reduce debt as they pursue higher education. Our students need these external funds. There is no doubt about it. So by displacing our funds to help offset our budget, we're not doing them any favors and we're not helping them progress towards graduation. Just as a quick anecdote, about 320 students at the University of Hartford received private scholarships in this past year. And again, the majority of those did not displace any of our institutional aid. The bigger issue with this bill for the University of Hartford is the impact on our spending of the Roberta Willis need-based scholarship dollars. Roberta Willis Need-Based Scholarship Fund allocations are not released to institutions until far after they start releasing financial aid award letters for next year's incoming class. Most institutions do require traditional first-year students to make a final enrollment decision by May 1st of their senior year. So timing is really important on this. This past academic year, Roberta Willis need-based fund allocations were not released until June, and institutions did not receive their official agreements until August. The university does not have additional resources to help make up the lack of Roberta Willis funds and to make assumptions on whether or not we will or will not receive those funds. This is even more true as federal aid and federal aid programs are in flux with the new administration. Just a note, Need Merit Awards were not officially confirmed until September. So while students were notified, institutions were not officially notified with a roster until September of this past year. Affordability, of course, remains at the forefront of decision-making for students and for parents, especially for our students who demonstrate those high financial needs. In order to provide adequate funding to these students and help them realize their dream of attending a private institution, we do provide an estimate of need-based aid to that student upfront, so prior to enrollment. This typically includes both institutional aid and federal aid programs. Once we know a student is eligible for a state program or a federal campus-based program, such as the federal SEOG grant, students are then alerted that a portion of the need-based aid they were initially offered is displaced with the federal or campus-based need program. When a student has any part of their institutional aid displaced with these state funds, they're alerted of this in the form of a revised financial aid award letter. And this is typically done after students begin the semester so that we're minimizing the amount of times that we have to do this and multiple reallocations of funds and creating further confusion for families. The total aid package does not change when we do this. So their total aid package stays the same. So their ability to pay or their bottom line funding amount is exactly the same. It's just changing the source of the funds. If we waited until we got the Willis allocations, some students might think that we are incorrectly unaffordable for them. So if we're no longer able to displace these scholarship awards, we will be forced to reduce aid packages up front for these students. Allowing displacement of scholarships once Roberta Willis allocations are released ensures that the funds are given to the students that need it the most and help accomplish the state goal of leveraging these grant funds to retain talent in the state of Connecticut. As of today, we have awarded nearly 2,000 students for next fall of 2025 already, with no information about what allocation of Roberta Willis scholarship program need-based funds will be available for next year. So again, if we're no longer able to replace these scholarship dollars, we will be forced to reduce aid packages for students. The impact of this change on our ability to spend Roberta Willis scholarship dollars for the neediest students is why the University of Hartford opposes this bill. Thank you all for your continued support for the University of Hartford and helping us educate students in the state of Connecticut.
Catherine, thank you for your testimony. It sounds like, taking the Roberta Willis issue aside for a moment, that this wouldn't have, correct me if I'm wrong, but the prohibition would not have a great impact on the school or its students, right? That the main crux of the objection here is the disbursement of Willis?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. So external and private scholarship funds, our policy on displacement won't be prohibited by this bill. It is mostly regarding the Roberta Willis funds.
Yeah, and it has been, the mission of, I know certainly my co-chair, myself, and many other people on this committee and in the General Assembly, to be fair, to fix the timing issue for Willis. And so it seems like maybe we have some more work to do on that front. Representative Haddad, do you have any comments or questions for Catherine? Oh, okay. We're thinking alike here. Anybody else? No? Catherine, I think you are free to go. We appreciate your time this afternoon, and we'll follow up if we have any other additional questions for you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, is there anybody else? No, I'm looking around. I don't see anybody in person or online. So that is going to conclude our public hearing. Do we have the next committee date off the top of our head? On Tuesday. Okay. So we'll meet again next week. Hang on one sec. Tuesday, the 4th, we'll get you a time for people who are paying attention. Great. So 11:30 on Tuesday, the Higher Education Employment Advancement Committee will be back in action. So we'll see you then. Thanks again, everyone.